Hello, I'm based at Leicestershire County Council in the Public Health Department, and I'm a health improvement practitioner. And what it is that I do is I support a programme called the Healthy Tots programme, Leicestershire Healthy Tots programme, which looks at accrediting settings to make them health promoters. And one of the aspects of the programme is looking at their community links. So my experiences with the intergenerational work is encouraging settings to link in with their nearest care homes and how they can potentially work together. There's been a number of settings. I think Caterpillar was one of the settings as well that you've just heard about, that we've worked with, and another one, I think they're in East Goscote, called Pocket Rocket, and they've gone into work in a residential setting as well. One of the things that we encourage about it is the fact that it benefits both parties, the children, because they get the opportunity to experience being with the generation that some of them quite sadly don't get to be with, because some of them either don't have grandparents or grandparents live away, but also the residents who have such a wealth of skills that they can share. And one of the projects that I've worked with is encouraging, it was a preschool, because obviously they closed during school holidays, but encouraging them to work with a residential home that's next door. So they've got they can make a sustainable garden that the children can benefit from, seeing things grow and actually learn where, I don't know, things like carrots come from, and it's not Tesco's, it's actually the ground. But also they've got some keen residents that are happy to maintain and look after the garden when the nursery's closed, so someone there to water them, and it gives them purpose and responsibility that some of them were really craving, but also it's an opportunity for them to share the skills that they've got. And whereas the children have got the ability to do some of the activities, the residents have the know-how on how to do it. So we encourage those links as well, because it means that the children can see from start to finish where food comes from. We also look at not just necessarily the nutrition side of things, but the emotional health and well-being side of things. So they also benefit, like the residents, from reducing the feeling of isolation and loneliness, and the children get a sense of belonging and responsibility themselves as well, because they equally, it's quite sweet, look after and care for, and you can see the relationships that they are able to grow with the residents. And it also helps with the physical activity element of the Healthy Tots programme that we work on. So there's the three areas: nutrition, physical activity and emotional health and well-being. And I think we make further links with Leicestershire and Rutland Sport with an activity that they're calling the Twilight Games, which is on the back of the Olympics, where they're trying to encourage physical activity in residential homes, and then linking in as well with some of the early years settings. But that's a beginning project. And that's me.
That's great, Tony. Thanks ever so much. That's really, really helpful to hear about. So we're going to now ask our presenters a few questions that will enable them to share a little bit more detail about the activities that are happening in the settings in which they're working in, and to tell us a little bit about what's been working and what hasn't been working. So I'm going to start by asking a question about how these activities are sustained and how they are continued long term. So we know from hearing from different stakeholders, from educational settings or from care settings, that it can be quite challenging to continue projects, and that there might be some one-off projects that work quite well. But the question we wanted to ask our presenters is, what do you think are the key ways to sustain intergenerational activities and to ensure that these projects are able to continue for the long term? So Mark, would you be able to answer that question first for us? I think you're still on mute, Mark.
There we go. Not only have we been going with Caterpillar Day Nursery, we've also been getting what they call the beavers with us as well. So we've been getting more people involved, not only with the one, because the children from the day nursery, they can't come every week. So we've been getting more involved, like with beavers, which are older children, which we have seen, which has been more of a positive reaction from them. I think it's because of the less of noise and stuff from the children, because they're a bit older and stuff. Communicating with them regularly, so we know that they're going to come and we can organise stuff that's happening, and just putting things into action really, and not pondering on anything and just getting it done.
I would second that, because I also work with Pocket Rocket that Tony was speaking with, and I think from both of those two settings, they've just sort of, from the early years point of view and from the care home point of view, got two settings that are very keen and understand completely why you want to do intergenerational work and are really passionate about it, and they've just sort of, they've planned to a certain extent, but then they've also just done it and got the sort of settings and together and sort of seen how it went. I think Pocket Rocket go in 3 times a week. I know they're out for summer holidays at the minute, but before that, 3 times a week, and with Caterpillar Day Nursery, they come in once a week. And then also just sort of seeing how people's schedules go in, because Caterpillar Day Nursery, they do actually work over summer, but they find it a bit more difficult, so they've just said, okay, we'll just reduce the amount of hours, so just working in people's, being a bit flexible with it as well, and seeing people, how much people are able to do. But yeah, just sort of getting started really.
Thanks, Mark and Joe. So it sounds like flexibility is quite a key aspect of developing how things can work in practice. Great, thank you. Well, Tony, would you be able to answer this question now? And so what do you think are the key ways to sustain intergenerational linking activities?
To be honest, I can just pretty much echo what both Joanne and Mark have just said, and it's about being flexible and giving it a go. I think it's important that both parties can work well together, so it's about the relationships, I think, between the nursery manager and potentially the residential manager, and just having open conversation and honest conversation with each other about what can be and can't be done. I think with regards to I think for Pocket Rocket, what works well with them is the fact that the residential home is literally on their doorstep. So it's finding out what's logistically possible. So the reason why Pocket Rocket can do is, I think it is 3 times a day that they go, is because it's quite a small setting and it's less than a 2-minute walk from door to door. Whereas I think is it Caterpillars? They're a bit. Are they a drive? I think they're a drive away from you, Joe, aren't they?
Walk. It's about a 15-minute walk. But if they've got the transport, they just drive down anyway. So. Yeah,
exactly. So it's sometimes it is there is the barriers of transport to and from, but I think it's just a case of trying to find out what, like I said, what's near and what's actually doable. But making things work long term, I do think it's a lot about making sure the networks and relationships are strong, because once you've done the groundwork there and you've both got an understanding and a feel for each other's settings, then you can potentially sort of plan out and make it work, and things happen as well. So sometimes, like you said, that they might not be able to come so much, but just keeping things planned in, I think, will help make things work long term.
Thanks, Tony. That's really helpful. Really helpful to hear from both of you that it's similar in terms of your response and your thoughts on those key aspects that will ensure sustainability of these types of projects. Our next question for presenters is, what are the barriers and the challenges that come up when setting up intergenerational linking projects? And how have you overcome these if they have come up for you? So, Mark, would you like to start again?
Yeah. Well, some of the barriers, we were doing the growing of the seeds and the cress so they could make their own sandwiches and stuff. We planted the seeds okay, but it just didn't grow. so well. So we backed it up with Sainsbury's, buying some cress, and and stuff like that. Also, some of the residents not wanting to do it because of the whole dementia setting. They don't remember the children coming, and we need to encourage them by showing them pictures and so on and so forth of what they've done in the past, and then them remembering that they've done it and enjoyed it, so then they will go and do it again.
With that, one of the nice things that we had a sort of meeting to review how things were going. So the nursery is going to produce a photo album of their pictures of their activities that they've done, and the care home's recently got a TV which can have a USB plugged into it, so it can have a reel of sort of photos, maybe videos as well. Yep. So it's a constant sort of reminder to the residents of what activities they've done, and also the families have been quite intrigued of what's going on, so publicising that to them more frequently so they can have those conversations about what activities they've done, so it's a bit more of a reminder and they're reliving it even throughout the week, maybe when the nursery's not in as well.
And we found also that setting up in advance, so we were doing it in our dining room, but then people didn't want to walk into the dining room to go and sit with the children and so on and so forth, so we moved the dining room into the living room and put it all in one, and as soon as the children came and they were sat at the tables, they were all getting out of the chairs and coming up and watching and getting involved, which we found was more ideal for them, is getting them involved in their setting instead of them having to move to somewhere else, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. And also that's allowed some residents to just observe, because I think from speaking with the residents after activities have gone on, sometimes they get a lot out from just watching and seeing something different happening in the care home as well, even though they're not necessarily getting actually physically involved, but that act of observing and then being able to talk about it, actually some residents do get a lot from that.
They like to watch. More of them like to watch than get involved.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And that sounds like it's a really interesting point, that residents can gain a lot from being in the room and being able to observe, as well as actually participating in activities with children and young people. And could I just add a question about whether there was any barrier to engaging at the start of this project, Mark? So was your care home very happy to get involved in this project from the start?
Yeah, I was even excited about it happening as well. I know the people that are from the care home anyway, personally, so it's easier to communicate with them because I don't feel no barriers between us and them. But it's like my manager, she's more than happy to do anything to get involved with anyone, so no barriers at all.
Okay, that's great to hear. Thank you. And Tony, would you be able to share with us a little bit about the barriers and challenges that might have come up in your role and how you might have overcome these? And so I'm sure you might have examples from different settings, as your role, you work with a variety of different people and settings. And so it'd be great to hear some of the examples that you've experienced.
Yeah, of course. One of the barriers, and what was quite a common one that I've kind of hear from settings, is the perception from parents of their children going into a care home, and to some extent managers as well. It's like what's in it for the children. I mean, it's quite easy to explain what's in it for the children when you then talk about the skills that they can learn, some almost lost skills that you can get from the older generation, and when you speak to managers and you're able to talk about logistics or how you can work together or find an open residential home that's happy to have people come in, and then explain to them that it's just like another school trip that they can do if one's within either walking distance, because nurseries tend to like to walk somewhere because they don't have quite often they don't have access to buses or like a setting transport per se. Another perception that came from some of the nurseries was a perception of, and it's sad to say, but of the children experiencing potentially might experience death. But at the end of the day, one of the settings that I have spoken to, they explained to me that actually a resident did pass away when they were actually there at the care home, but obviously not in the room with all the children. But the residential home dealt with it very, very, very well, as I can imagine you often or might have to do sometimes. And they said that actually the children weren't even slightly phased by what had happened. I don't think they're even aware of what had happened. And they said it was more managing the staff and the staff's expectations and comforting the staff to experience something like that. But the children were really resilient and actually made it into a bit more of a better experience, because the children they're very black and white, aren't they, and how they see things. So that was another interesting conversation that's come up when I've been speaking about intergenerational work with settings. And I mean, there's two sides to that, but majority of them tended to not necessarily see it, once spoken about, as a necessary problem. The other barrier that came up from parents was the children making links to not parents, it was about safeguarding, like what kind of safeguarding needs to be put into place. But when I mean, like I said, it's not something that we don't necessarily write the safeguarding policies, that's down to the care homes and the nurseries, but the thing that we ask them to think about is to think about it as a normal trip when they're taking children out. So to make sure that they've got all procedures in place. Both the care homes have their own procedures and the settings also there, so making sure the numbers are right. For example, if a child needs to go to the toilet, what would they normally do in a normal outing? So that was another issue that was brought up, but again, it was easily resolved once you start to explain it as just a normal school trip, and they're not necessarily in charge or responsible for the residents from a settings point of view. And equally, I suppose, from the residential home, that the people working there aren't necessarily responsible for the children. They're kind of each to your own. And I already sort of mentioned about logistics and transport. And I think you touched on it, as whether the residents actually want to be involved. And I've heard this one before as well. But sometimes it's a case of just asking them. And once the children are there, I think more often than not, I've heard that actually the resident that was most reluctant to want to get involved has actually been one of the key people that has actually ended up looking forward to it, or one of the main people involved in it all, and becomes the life and the soul of the party for a term. They're pretty much, in a nutshell, some of the barriers that I've come across.
Thanks, Tony. Mark, I can see that you're nodding, and have you got something to add to that?
Just to touch upon that, the last comment that Tony said, they say they don't want to do it. It's like you go around asking before they want to come, and they're saying, oh no, why would I want to bother doing that? We've got two people that will sit there and say, I don't want to do this, I don't see the point of it. And then when the children turn up, they're the first people to get up and walk into and go and watch. I think it's them turning up rather than telling them that gets them more involved, because they'll sit there and say, I don't want to do it, and then as soon as the kids come in, they're straight up on their walkers and going in and getting more involved than anyone else. No, that's it.
Yeah, so it goes back to your point earlier on about needing to try out these activities.
It's once something gets started, I think they're more likely to get involved than telling them what's going to be happening, I think.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thank you both of you for that. So our next question, and I'll actually just remind those people who are participating as attendees, if any of you would like to ask a question, please feel free to write a question in the conversation on Skype in the instant messenger, and we'll do our best to ask and answer those questions during the webinar. Our next question is related to how we can make these types of activities really valuable and meaningful for those people involved. So how do we ensure that these activities are designed and set up in a way that ensures that they are making a real difference to people's lives, and for both residents within care settings and for the children involved, and possibly for staff as well. So I'm sure that there are examples of the intergenerational linking activities having an impact on staff and staff wellbeing potentially as well in care settings. And so it'd be great if you could talk about what it is about activities that do make them really valuable and meaningful. So Mark, have you got some examples and things to share from your experience?
One week we had, we were all out in the garden and we were all like, I think it was the making the sandwiches.
Yeah.
And a resident's family member turned up and definitely got involved, was really encouraging her mum to get involved and stuff. But then she started turning up at the same time on the Fridays to get involved. So I think that gets it more, because then we've got pictures of her with her mum and we can show her them that she's been doing this with, because if they forget, it's like, do you remember doing this? So photos, all stuff like that really.
You said also before about how families encourage.
Yeah, families always encouraging them to do stuff.
If they're actually there with them at the time, that can be a really good way to get, because sometimes it's about the residents' confidence as well. So I know I've spoken to some residents in mental health that when you speak to them, they really want to get involved, but then you can see they're a little bit reluctant, just personality-wise and maybe other things. So they might need some different support. So obviously Mark and the team know the residents really well and know what the individuals need as well. So for some residents, having their family members there, just maybe for a couple of times whilst the children are there, can encourage them along, and then they can get more out of it as well.
But like we did that when we had the beavers come. They did so-called cake decorating, but we didn't have any cake, so we did it on rich tea biscuits. And when they were doing it, all the other residents that didn't want to get involved were asking what they were doing. So I was taking photos and showing them what they were doing, and they were like, "Oh, that sounds quite good." And then that brought more into taking them in to do stuff, because they need to see what they're. So I think photos works, just reminding them what they've been doing, and definitely the families. We encourage the families to come on a Friday. So
that's great. Thanks, Mark.
Like talking to the residents and asking.
Yeah, and to asking them what they want to do as well, instead of us deciding what we want to do, asking them what they want to do as well.
Great. Have you been able to observe which activities make a real difference for the children that have been involved?
Anything that's new for the children, like we did butter making, which didn't go so well because the lady brought the wrong cream, because it's where you shake cream in a tub and it thickens into butter. She brought a substitute cream, El-Me, so it didn't quite work. It just made curdled stuff. So then we had to go in the fridge and get real butter. But
maybe having a plan B.
Always having a plan B in action as well. So fridge, Sainsbury's.
Yeah, from ones that I've sort of visited, the kids have enjoyed every activity. And I'll say one thing it's hard to explain, to be honest, when you're saying about staff, what effects it's had on staff. There's just quite an energy when the children are coming to visit, like a really happy atmosphere, and you can just with everyone, with the staff, with the residents, with the children, with the.
A couple of the children have clung on to the staff big time. One of them runs to one of the members of staff and gives them a hug as soon as they walk in the door. And that's someone that. And were you there when the little girl was holding Pam's hand?
No.
walking around with one of the residents holding a hand because she's not got grandparents. So it's nice to see.
That's one thing that's nice as well, that the nursery, so they only come in a group of 8 children, so it's a little bit smaller grouping, and they try and bring the same children as much as possible, so that it's building that familiarity, and you can maybe build those sort of relationships between different personalities and different children and different residents. So I think that'll be something really, it's already nice to see how it's built, but ongoing as well, how those sort of relationships will develop.
Thanks, Mark and Joe. That's really, really helpful. And just before we move on to Tony with the same question, we've had a question come through on our conversation from Alison Iliffe, and Alison's asked about the example described today, and most of the intergenerational work with care homes that Alison's seen involve young children. And Alison's asked if any of our better care work is with secondary school age children or older children. And so I'll just start by answering your question, Alison, that we have settings in Edinburgh where a secondary school has linked with a care home called Inchview care setting, and the secondary school is Liberton High School. And in this connection and this project, the secondary school students have been involved in supporting the food growing activities at the care setting. In particular, the students from the school got involved in setting up a polytunnel and putting that up for the residents, and this has been a really strong connection, and the care setting has won an award for their work, their intergenerational linking work as well with this school. So if you want to find out more about that particular project in Edinburgh, do get in touch and we can share more information about the work with this secondary school. Tony, you might be able to add a little bit more. I don't know if you've worked with any secondary schools as well. Do you want to answer that question now, Tony?
I was just going to say, to be honest, I don't really, because my area of work is early years, but I have a colleague that works with Leicestershire Healthy Schools. She may know of other case studies or situations where they have worked together, and I'm sure I've heard of something very similar to what you've said before, but I don't know any off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
Okay, no worries. Thanks, Tony. Well, yeah, thanks again for the question, Alison. Hopefully that's helpful. And so, Tony, over to you with our question about how do you think we can make these types of intergenerational activities really valuable and meaningful for everybody who does get involved. So thinking about residents within care settings, thinking about the children who get involved, but also the staff.
I mean, I've sort of touched on some of the areas, but I just wanted to echo something that I think Joe had just sort of said, that the one of the settings that I went in to observe, it was the first time I'd ever sort of linked in with anything intergenerational. So I went to go do a visit with them, and one thing that stood out for me, personally, was when walking into the setting, to the care home, what really surprised me was the volume that suddenly really increased. But it wasn't from the children, it was from all the residents that were there, and it felt like a proper goose pimple moment of walking in, and just it almost lightened the whole room when the children walked in. And I mean, the children were just playing with, I think they brought Lego bricks and balls that their children were just playing with. Some of the residents weren't necessarily getting involved in the activity, but you could just see how their faces were so lit up watching the children and then talking to their friends sat either side of them about whatever the children were getting involved in. And it was such a pleasure to experience that. And I think that in itself shows how meaningful it is, just the children just sometimes just being there. because it's extra visitors for some of the residents that I'm sure they don't get to have them as many as they potentially would like, but just like I said, just what made it so meaningful was just even just having the children there. And I think that example for me is what drives me when I talk about the intergenerational things and makes me feel so passionate about it, because it was such a lovely thing to experience. And I think unless you actually go in and do it, and with regards to some of the nurseries just doing it, you're not going to really understand it unless you're in it, if you know what I mean. But what will make it meaningful is, like we've spoke about again, it's the communication between staff from both settings, so from the nursery and the residential home, to make sure that they not necessarily plan, because some of it needs to be in the moment, but the communication's kept open so they can understand the needs of both parties involved. That potentially can make it quite meaningful. Taking advantage of any learning opportunities that the children could potentially have. So when we've talked about growing things, that's an opportunity to talk to a child about from planting a seed and actually what this can grow into. So there's learning opportunities that are there. Making the residents feel valued with the skills and the knowledge that they probably do have. Is always another good way, I think, to make it meaningful. I think that's about it.
Thanks, Tony. So I think that's a really interesting point about ensuring that residents feel valued, and I think you mentioned the sharing of lost skills earlier in the webinar as well. And so the opportunity for these types of projects to and give residents the opportunity to be contributing to supporting young people and children and their education is a really important aspect of ensuring these activities are very meaningful for the residents involved.
Yes, definitely. I think the talking of the making of the butter is a perfect example of that, because it's not something that we really ever do now, and I'm not sure whether even many grown-ups now even know how butter's made, although it probably would be good to make sure you've got the right cream.
As soon as we started, as soon as we got the little tubs out and the cream, two of the residents were like, "Oh, what we're doing making butter? Am I going to have to sit here going like this all afternoon?" Which made them laugh. They loved it, and I was like, "Yeah, that's what we're going to do." And she went, "Okay then," and then they just sat there like that. But when it wasn't working, they saw the funny side of it as well, because I told them what had happened. I was like, "It's the wrong cream," and she was like, "Well, I'm not going to be having this on my bread then." So
that's great. Yeah, great to hear those examples. So we've come to the end of our key questions that we wanted to explore today in the webinar. And so I just wanted to ask Tony, Mark and Joe, if there's anything further that any of you would like to add, that you think, any points that you feel are really important learning and would be helpful to share with people on this webinar who are interested in intergenerational linking projects. So is there anything that might have been missed, or anything further that you would like to share about the projects you've been involved in?
I just think we've had a number of all even before we got into this Food for Life and stuff, we've always had different mixed range of children turn up, because at Christmas we always have children come to sing and stuff like that, and Valentine's Day children come and whatever and what have you. We found that the smaller children, they think to be a bit noisy, but the older children, like you said, the secondary school children, we've had secondary school children come before, and because they can have conversations, you see them sit there and they will have conversations, and it's like I've got photos at work of them all sitting round together, and you just see the I don't know what my point is, but I think it's more that the older children seem to work a bit better sometimes, because when we did some food printing, and we did it in the lounge, and some of them were sitting there with covering their ears, I think, because of the noise that sometimes can make. Like the older, like getting more children, like various ages involved as well, not just
Yeah.
the smaller ones.
I think that's a nice thing that you guys have got, that you've got the early years, but then you've also got the beavers as well. So also they have sort of, you're developing your gardens as well,
Yeah.
and they've got a caravan project going on. So it's nice to have those different ages, because they're able to do different things. So the beavers might be involved in sort of transforming this caravan into a kind of summer holiday caravan, like at the beach, and the younger children can sort of do planting and will pay attention and do maybe more little creative things like that they might want to more watch. So there's sort of different opportunities, but it's nice to have that sort of connection between with more than one intergenerational setting. So maybe that's sort of
That was my point.
something to think about. That if you've got one already, maybe another one of a different age can add different things.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Mark. Could you tell us a little bit more about the caravan?
So the caravan, our boss bought it, and we're going to turn it into like Joe just said, like a summer thing. It's going to have. It's been moved into a garden, and we're going to have a sandpit. Inside, I think they're going to use the kitchen.
Yeah, so it's still got a working cooker in it, so they are going to use it for cooking. And
we've got a summer fete on Sunday, Saturday, so it's all ready for that. And to interlink it with what I think it was Tony said earlier, the Twilight Games. We've just been on the thing for that, so we've just started the Twilight Games and stuff in our care home as well, which we've not got the pack yet, but we've sort of progressed it ourselves, so we can sit and play these games as well. So a mini sort of sports day on which the residents can watch, not participate in, of course.
Great. Okay. Thanks for that. And Tony, over to you. It'd be great to hear if there are any final points that you would like to share around learning and your experience of intergenerational linking projects.
To be honest, I think we've covered most of it, but I'd just say that to anybody that's willing to give it a go, it's no harm just finding out what's near you, picking up the phone and just asking, because the worst thing you can be told at the end of the day is going to be a no, but at least you've given it a go. So that's pretty much my only point, because all the settings that I've come across, that's all that they've really done, is that they've either just got in contact and found out what's near them and have just done it.
Okay, that's great, Tony. Yeah, really helpful, and I'm sure really encouraging to anybody who is listening today to the webinar. So we're going to be bringing the webinar to a bit of a close now. So I wanted to just remind everybody on the webinar that it is being recorded today, and the recording of the webinar will be shared widely, and so we hope that if there are any colleagues or contact people who you think would benefit from listening to the webinar as well, we'll be able to send that on to them. So we'll be in touch about the link to the recorded webinar. We've heard a lot of really interesting examples and stories, and we've heard a lot about the learning and the challenges that might have got in the way and how they've been overcome as well today. So it's been really helpful to hear about those different aspects of the projects that have been taking place. So a big thank you to Tony Burnett and to Mark Hecker and Joanne Plater from Food for Life as well, for being our presenters on today's webinar. So thank you for all of your time and input into the webinar today. We will be doing further webinars through Food for Life Better Care, and so do look out for future webinars coming up. And thank you also to all of the attendees, the participants who have joined the webinar today to listen in and to ask questions and get involved. It's great to have had you all involved today, and we hope that you've found the webinar interesting and beneficial. So thanks again to everyone involved. And we shall say goodbye there. So thanks a lot, everyone, and we'll hopefully talk to you all again at some point soon. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda. Bye bye.
Bye now.